Pokémon Detective Pikachu marks the first time the anime characters have stepped onto the big screen as photorealistic creatures. But creating these characters for the real world, without upsetting die-hard fans, was no easy feat. It required an army of animators, over a year of design collaboration, a meticulous study of animal biology, and even enlisting the help of a famous mime. Animated Pokémon were first introduced to the world in 1996, and for the 2019 live-action movie, it took a lot of time and a large team of people to get it right, and make sure the fans would approve of the updated look.
How can we add additional detailing without ever breaking the spirit of the original character?
That's Pete Dionne, VFX supervisor at MPC, which worked on Detective Pikachu, as well as other big films like The Jungle Book, The Lion King, and Godzilla. MPC Films had over 600 people working on the project, with the help of hundreds more from other VFX companies like Framestore and Image Engine. The VFX team spent an entire year designing the characters before the filming even started, working closely with the Pokémon company in the process, which had one main rule.
No matter what situation they're in, they always have to be cute.
This meant no creepy gnarled teeth, nasty fingernails, or skin blemishes, although they pushed the limit with Licky Tongue and his slobbery appendage. About 60 Pokémon from the original series were recreated for the film. They started with the original 2D anime characters and video game models as a base.
There's that one main Pikachu that we see in all of the anime that we really recognize, and that's the one that we chose to embrace.
Next, they would find some real-world animal equivalents, or as close as they could get. For Pikachu, for example, they looked at animals like bush babies and lemurs.
We wanted to represent it as a very confident quadruped animal.
They would then take the skeletal structure of these animals and tweak it to fit the character's shape. In Pikachu's case, the skull needed to be enlarged, and the limbs needed to be elongated. Once the structure was laid out, they would then add layers of fat and muscle.
I'm trying to get in 100,000 steps this hour.
And on top of all that, the fur. They studied the fur patterns on animals like rabbits to make it look more natural.
When we get really close to Pikachu, you really see kind of all that detail.
Here's an example of the various layers of creature creation from another of MPC's past projects, The Jungle Book. Next up, movement. They started rigging the characters early on in the design process. Rigging is when you lay out the framework for how a character will move, and for this they took their biology into consideration. In cartoons, characters can squash and stretch, but since these characters are based in reality, they had to rely on real physics and specific proportions.
We'd grab clips of bulldog puppies frolicking and playing with each other, animate our Bulbasaur creature to match that.
Mewtwo was modeled to look like a muscular child, but his movements were heavily influenced by cats. The most difficult Pokemon to nail down? Mr. Mime.
With Mr. Mime, we actually did the opposite of what we did with all the other characters, which was, how do we make this thing not look like a human?
To accomplish this, they used recognizable synthetic materials to make up his form. His shoulders are like the old red kickballs everyone remembers from childhood. The body and horns on his head are made to resemble worn Nerf football foam. And his skin is like silicone, which absorbs most of the light.
I think it worked. I don't think anyone thinks he's a human. Man, he's still creepy though.
And to model his movements, they actually hired a real-life mime from New Zealand, named Trygve Wakenshaw. Some of his scenes were rotoscoped from his actual performances. When it came to the battle scene between Mewtwo and Pikachu, the animators made sure to stick to canon as much as possible for their movesets. Each a recreation of the original moves, but with more realistic flair, influenced by smoke, plasma, and electricity.
The end result was something that felt kind of photographically realistic, but at the same time, when you kind of compare side by side with our references, they take on a lot of the same qualities.
Since Pikachu is the star of the film, they spent a lot of work on his facial features. They attached a camera to Ryan Reynolds' head and captured 80 different expressions. Next, they looked at the cartoon Pikachu's range of emotions, which were very limited.
We took Ryan Reynolds' expressions, we took Pikachu's expressions, and then we created kind of our hybrid set.
So once the team had the characters nailed down, they needed to start integrating them into the real world and the filming process. Typically, with these types of productions, they first create some puppets, or stuffies, which are used on set in place of the animated character. They shoot several takes with the puppets so the actors have something to work with, and so the animators can get a sense of important details, like lighting and reflections.
And often, those were the best takes, and we would use those takes and just paint the puppeteer out after.
Afterwards, they would shoot clean takes without the puppets. For some secondary characters, they just made texture balls with swatches of fur. To get accurate reflections in the Pokemon's eyes, they also took 360-degree images of the set and mapped them back into the orbs, as you can see here.
And we could see exactly, in the glass eyes of our Pikachu puppet, exactly what that environment reflected into his eyes should look like.
They had to make sure the real-world canvas had the right look and feel to make the cartoonish Pokemon seem as real as possible when integrated into it. They shot the movie on 35mm film instead of digital to add a grittiness. And it was filmed on location in Scotland and England as much as possible to ground the more surreal elements in a lived-in reality. And because it's a detective movie, Rhyme City was given a noir feel. Cool and dark colors, with plenty of shadows and neon lights reflecting off wet streets. Another crucial factor in blending the characters with the real world is props. The team used a mix of both digital and practical objects.
We were sticking props everywhere just for Pikachu to bump into.
For example, in this scene when Pikachu is walking around the office, there are real strings tied around the room. But any strings he touches are actually digital, as we see here. Anytime you see him pick up a coffee cup, those are digital. But when he bumps into something like a chair, they would have a puppeteer move it at the right moment. For the parade scene at the end, the team created real balloons and were prepared to raise them in the streets of London. But it was too windy, so they never got them off the ground. While you still see these semi-inflated props in a few shots, the rest are CGI. Another challenging scene for the animators that mixed real props and CGI was the Torterra Forest. Most of the first shots were filmed in a real valley in Scotland to set the scene, but they created massive rigs for the actors to move around on, which were later combined with CG. The result of all these techniques and attention to detail kept the Pokemon true to their original form, while at the same time immersing them in a new, more real world for fans of the franchise to enjoy.
Seeing the characters realized with like fur and textures, and it's so cool. It's like a childhood dream come true, you know?